And then if we go to visualizing the growth, so we are now in the scaling phase. How would we potentially kind of try to have the simplest format of how our company is actually growing? Because just looking at the numbers and you have number of people working in the company, you have number of customers, you have number of revenue, you have number of processes, you have numbers. But what else? How you could visualize that? Because it's not only to understand what's going on at any specific financials, marketing, HR, like building the organization. So you could have something of this nature as a beginning part. You could have like, what is the big picture that we're trying to accomplish? You have the deployment or the growth timeline in place. You have a certain set of offerings listed, whether that's at feature level, a sub-page of this, or whether that would be in the product offering level. So now just looking at, basically this is the customer segment and offering fit. So how many combinations of offerings we have, the segments that we have, that would be one vertical line, and you could basically put them, visualize them in that shape. And then how much are we covering of everything that we need from that, basically capturing data for KPIs in this. So how much are we having processes and capturing knowledge of this offering at any given time. So if you have starting point like this, then as you introduce new offerings, you start from MVPs, you start from when you start having more customers, you need to have support, you have the lead times, you have the lifetime values, you have the growth of the whole delivery, you have the recommendation engine going, and basically even from the first sales you can start tracking things, but as the offering gets more market presence and so forth, more coverage in the market, basically the more data and information and processes you need. And then you could start looking this in a format where you can have a one snapshot situation of where is the company compared to the big picture is like where do we want it to be, and then the looking at the progress of painting that big picture, where are we in our progress. So this would be the kind of the overall progress. And of course with this now you could say, hey, based on how this one offering per this segment is going, it's not looking as powerful as some of these other things, so let's just drop the whole thing and let's look at the other ones. So you could add new one in the end, you could remove anything from the beginning, you could prioritize their order in context of what are we focusing on delivering next, and you are basically improving this in 2 dimensions. One is more offerings to more segments, and the other direction is how effectively are we covering that offering to that segment in our operations overall. So then when it comes to growing the organization itself, so now we have looked at all the tools, the processes, the KPIs, the logics, and various things of how we are looking what types of things we need and why do we need them to be able to grow the organization. But to grow the organization is basically gets down to people, at least for the most part. Regardless of how efficient we create things, we still need people. So this is a great statement of what would be optimal if just thinking from purely like analog business perspective. So the perfect business is a computer plugged in the internet. Every human thereafter is an overhead. So if we can get, at some point, the AI to deliver on blockchain the whole business scenario and it just magically works. That's kind of the thing. But unfortunately, like just looking at the things that need to be built, it's pretty obvious that that level of creativity and effort that is needed to create all those processes and things, it will take some time until humans are not needed. When it comes to running those processes, for sure, the better and more, that's where automation and that's where humans are needed less and less. The better the processes are described, the more data there is available, the more we can automate things. But even getting them to automate it from manual to automated needs a lot of people resources. And ultimately, if it becomes so that people are only needed to create these things and then have automation take care of them, then basically we would be in the situation where we could solve much more of the world problems because more people would be freed from executing processes versus creating them in the needs that actually delivers value to different problems in the world. So it doesn't look that bad. So ultimately, the thing that you are building is this kind of machine and that has the KPIs attached to it. So this is a visualization to think of the thing that being built. But the key here is that you should not be a piston in that engine yourself. It's very hard to build that engine from inside out. So while you need to take it apart every now and then, you can look at the measures, but if you see something is wrong or you can apply, then you need to analyze it. You need to break it up from, maybe you just need to look at the carburetor, maybe you just need to look at the starting engine, whatever that is. You need to fix it, you need to replace it, you need to improve it, you need to upgrade it. But that's your role as when you're scaling the organization. You're building this machine, but then the point is to run the machine and not be a piston or any component inside there in the engine. You can go there, stay there for a while, but that's not where you are building the company from. So when we then put this in the context, all of this we put the whole organization and growing the organization in the digital world context. If we look at the traditional organizations, so how most of the organizations before digital time, so digital time means before like cloud internet services and APIs and all of that. So the digital transformation that is already happening and is also only accelerating and expanding. The world where we used PCs and we installed software in the PC and all of the software were run locally and in the time where only the processes existed in a documented format and they have no automation in place. They don't have more processes connecting different or no automation connecting different processes to each other, basically meaning software to run it. This is the majority of the organizations, even the big ones today. And the challenge here is that all of the knowledge still flows through people to people, and people are trying to understand and communicate and do these things as an organization. The more there is this, the less digital it is. If we look at organizations like Facebook, Google, Amazon for sure, basically they try to put as much of those processes, data, KPIs, everything they build, maybe first manually, maybe running them first manually, but then they want to automate and build as much of those into software. And because many of these companies are actually started by technology people like Facebook or Amazon and so forth, they have from the beginning, instead of actually building the organizations with Google Docs and stuff like that, they have tried to make them as applications as early as possible. And once they have kind of created that as a pattern, majority of their business is actually run, and the processes are run as a real engine also internally, not just the software what they're selling externally, but also how they run their organizations. So now you can imagine making a process change or a function change in this type of organization, and how you have to motivate people to follow the new rules of the process, how it works, and so forth, versus something like this, where basically the process is changed and the interface is changes to people who are part of that process. And now that was basically introduced for the whole organization, a new process, how it runs. And of course, this is a simplified logic of this, but it gives the idea of how little there is risk of misunderstanding things, or how quickly those can be identified and improved. So this is kind of one of the reasons why, for example, Amazon, when they enter to a new market like groceries in US, why it has such a huge impact on other companies, organizations, valuations in the stock market when they enter. It's not about, like, it has a reason and the rationale, and that's basically because they know that the investors know that the engine that they are using to run the processes more efficiently and leveraging their digital expertise and knowledge will have such a big difference compared to the existing older organizations that are still struggling to run their organizations with less automation. So this type of difference between these organizations is, of course, also a big opportunity for new organizations that are growing and starting with more digital mindset from the beginning. It's regardless of how difficult and challenging it is to grow an organization, with this digital component, it actually, in many cases, is still easier and faster because of the available tools to build a digitally operated organization compared to trying to convert a existing organization and existing processes at the whole organization level to become more digitally native. And there's statistics to support this as well, that up to 70% of digital transformations to existing big organizations fail. And that's a big number. It's close to, it's not the same, but it starts to be close to the same number as how many startups fail. So the further we go into the future, the playing field just gets more leveled all the time, because it's not only about what position you have in the market, but how you can effectively run your entire organization in that market. So getting back to that, growing the organization, again, taking from the very beginning and from the validation phase, having the DNA canvas, really you need something to really get everyone at the very top level, regardless of their position in the organization. So not only the top management, not only the strategic part, not only the middle management, not only for your partners. You need something to really communicate the whole essence of the company and everything that is in part, and what is the processes that are run, all the things that happen in the company. You need to understand through something that is simple enough. So getting back to this, why does the company exist? What is its mission? Why does it need to exist? What is the purpose? How does it make that purpose to materialize? Like, what is the strategy of applied in the organization level, and ultimately what are the products and ways of services and processes and things, how that manifests itself into markets. So this is really the top thing. After that, the DNA canvas is the verbal description in a very short format on these things and seeing how all of these relate to each other. And then the roadmap describes high level description of where we are in our progress, what are our upcoming milestones, and what are the milestones here. So this could be a 5-year plan, this could be a 2-year plan, whatever that may be, depending on at what level you need to communicate. But this should not be, the milestones here should not be in this roadmap, they should not be the next 3 months, they should not be the next month, it should not be this year. It should be at least 3 years or that kind of period. But it doesn't have to be at the level where it's today and then vision 10 years later. So you just need to know relevant time period of what we are working at the moment. And of course, the roadmap keeps updated with the progress as needed, or key learnings or key pivots if something needs to be changed. But the why, mission, strategy, vision, they should not be changed that often. But this is the separate thing, this is the strategy thing that you only need to look at periodically. So I would say not often than once a month, perhaps once a quarter, perhaps even twice a year later on, only to really take this up in that meeting and really evaluate if everything is still correct. And then also having the values of the organization. How do we behave? How do we not behave? What do we value? What do we don't value? And things like that. Top 10 description. And this should be used for every new recruit, for communicating to partners in different ways on the website and so forth. But you need a tool to capture and have the master and update and iterate it. So here's the more detailed information about this tool and Canvas again, and there's those icons take you to YouTube videos for more details. Growing the organization, again, getting to types of people that you want. Of course, they need to resonate with the whys and the mission, vision and so forth, but really looking for type A people that are motivated by the vision and mission and values more or equally as much as the money that is being paid for them. And the type A people really want to work with other type A people where they can learn from each other, where can they challenge each other, and try to avoid the type of people that have the attitude of commitment issues, always need something before they can do something, that they need more money or they are missing this or they can't do because of that or whatever. Like, everyone has those challenges, but whether they are proactively solving them, or every time there's a new thing and a new thing and a new excuse. And oftentimes they are more about needing money, spending money to do things instead of using their creativity, their own activity, actions, and capabilities to accomplish things. So type B people then, unfortunately, if you accidentally hire someone like this in a management position, then they don't definitely want to have people that clearly outperform them or outshine them, because that would be risk for their own position. Therefore, they typically hire even other type B people or even lower than that, so that they can actually look better than what they are. So now you can understand how this problem concept would multiply itself if you building an organization from 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people. So pay attention to this. 10 different organizations, and there's tons of practices of how to hire good people, how to avoid bad hires, and so forth. But ultimately, you need to find your own way. So the attitude is really the core thing. Like if nothing else matters, then the attitude does, because that is the driving factor for how people learn or don't learn, or if they're willing to learn, or whether they are problem solvers or not problem solvers, whether they are lifelong learners or not. But of course, you want to get as much of the right attitude with the embedded and existing skill sets already in place as what you can, of what you can find. For example, where you can start to see some warning flags is, for example, if people are too stuck with pushing the tools that they use privately. So let's say someone is very effective using a certain tool, whether that's any tool that they have used in previous organization and so forth and so forth. And the organization that you're working with, what you have built and put in place and all others are already working with, is the one the organization is going to use for the obvious reasons. But they keep pushing, why can't we choose this tool? Let's change this tool, let's start to use this tool. So basically they are restricting their own learning curve to learn a new tool. It's not a big thing, it's a relatively small thing, instead of pushing for the whole organization to change a tool and everyone else to learn that tool. So they are not really looking at what's the best for the company and the organization, even if they flag it in that way, saying if we change this tool, it will be more powerful than the tool that we are using now, because they're missing the point of everyone else having to learn. Of course, if there's just not enough experience, someone can do that. But if you have a very experienced person much later in their career and they basically start pushing things like that, then that's a flag. Same if coding with certain software that is already outdated, they say, but this is more secure, there's more things available, but the technology is developing to a whole new level and they're just restricting to learn the new technology again, which everyone has to do. There's always something new and you have to learn new things, because new things don't develop for any other reason, because that there has some new core value that the previous ones can't deliver anymore, and they will get outdated. So finding a right balance between this, but attitude, it matters. So try to focus on these things that are universal, because of course there are then other things that go to specific expertise in a specific task and so forth. One other aspect is to learn to delegate, and for those who are very good and self-learners and capable of learning many things and having perspectives into many matters, just because they keep learning and trying to get to that, and entrepreneurs and those entrepreneurial people and founders definitely have these types of qualities. But delegating the responsibility to others can be, it's difficult. It's surprisingly difficult when starting to do that the first time. So if you can't constantly do things because you can do them faster, you can do them quicker, you can do the first version very quick and so forth and so forth. That's a lot of things that actually you continuously have to do, specifically with new things that are not done yet in the organization, because that's a good way to learn it yourself and then be able to document it and educate to others. But delegating is different, because it's giving up the responsibility and to others. And sometimes it may feel, depending on the profile to whom it's delegated to, if it's someone who may be not as creative, but once they really figure out how to run with that process, they may be willing needed and feel happy about doing that. And it's clear that the creative person would not be patient enough to do that type of thing. So there's a learning curve. The more people want to be or are willing to be fixed and executing it repeatedly, they may have a higher learning curve and more questions to get that may feel frustrating in the beginning, but once they figure it out, they can really run with that for a long time. On the other side, someone who may take it quickly may really quickly get bored and don't actually run with that process. It also sense of saying this is your responsibility and then micromanaging, then the person feels that it's actually not their responsibility. So regardless of what they do, they always get feedback and get corrected. And if they keep asking questions, they can pass their own kind of sub-level small decision making back to the management and say, and that's not, then the work didn't get delegated. There's just now two people doing the one person's work. So of course you don't want that. So you need to find the right balance with right type of people. You need to read into right. You need to give the responsibility freedom for them to operate and run with that. But the key here is the KPIs. You need to have the KPIs attached to them so that you can track and things can be flagged when there are problems happening with that, and then have a constructive conversations to solve that problem and improve the documentation if that may, or change the process, whatever that may be. And ultimately, if not working, then of course changing the person as well. So it's really learning to let go while not really fully letting go. So the trick is to get enough distance and put some wires in between instead of direct management. So you need to know that string coming to this dashboard with these metrics, you know where it comes from, you have an idea of the structure, but you are not looking at that all the time. Someone else is looking at that. And the less you need to put people in between to report to that, and the more direct you have wires, aka KPIs attached to real places, the more real is your perspective into what's happening in the company. Then it's separate how you summarize that data into this to be visible to you. But the more it's manual, the more it comes through people, the more broken phone problems you will have in your organization. So initially, delegating feels more work until it starts to work, and finding the right balance areas to test and validate is the trick. And it's like anything else that either you have not done before and you have to learn, or you are already doing it and you are learning to become better at it. It's a thing where you do these things and your gut feel keeps getting better, and the combination of doing more of them with different people, with different scenarios, with different KPIs, you'll get better at it. And the point here is that as a founder, you don't need to know and you don't need to be responsible of all of these things, but you need to know that they are taken care of. And anyway, you need to have access to those KPIs. So it's the delegation is a skill like any other, and you may even, at whatever level you are, you may have this also at personal level, whether that's between like someone who is assisting or managing your calendar or whatever that may be for a long term. It's really a crucial and key skill, again, for scaling team and organization. And then the whole organization, of course, both need managers and leaders. And someone needs to lead the way, but then also things need to be managed. So one person can be both, but you also need to think what is needed from a leader to show a way, to show, to take on, responsibility of even things where others may have failed, and taking responsibility on behalf of the whole organization to say we'll fix that, but taking the blame and protecting the organization and people, even if it happened there, and then going and finding the root cause. Manager is more, of course, the actual management work of making sure those things get fixed, making sure those don't get repeated, and so forth. But this may be also that there is a clear two roles here where it's better to separate the operative management responsibility and making sure that the machine runs well versus the one who is showing the way, leading the way, and taking the blame when things are not working. And then also when it comes to management, it's key that in different countries and therefore different cultures, there are clear differences. So these need to be taken into account when hiring people and making sure that the cultural fit is well. So for example, in some countries, the management is such an authority still that if manager gives too much responsibility to next level, people actually feel that the manager is not good, that they don't know what they're doing, and it's a worrying thing. They stress out that now we don't have a smart manager because they give so much responsibility out that they don't know what they're doing. Whereas in other cultures, it may be exactly the opposite, that they are bad manager because that feels like micromanaging, like why can't we run with our own expertise and skills, everything is documented, we know what we're doing, the management is not trusting us. And then even in some cultures, it's more that there's much clearer separation between a leader and a manager. So clearly someone who is the visionary, someone who is leading, and then there's always the second in charge who basically makes the organization run and everything works so that the leader can really focus on leading and pushing things forward. But that could then accidentally lead to a position where if there is no someone who's managing that then there's too big of a gap between pushing and leading the organization forward versus the capability of organization to follow. So when it gets to tools, really the key is get real KPIs and those wires in right places versus office politics and just hearing what people have to say about things, because nobody has a complete picture, and then all the different dynamics between people get into way of things versus measures are facts. They are what they are, then it's a separate question of finding what are the reasons behind them. But if not having those then and running only between people, it's really hard to grow the organization. This also then the company culture in this context when growing it is that that's mainly through the values and the mission. That's where it's designed. Every company has it. Don't let it become what it becomes. So opt in for designing it. So it's planned and set and designed with set values and agreed rules and policies. And those are words that many startups or new entrepreneurs kind of don't feel comfortable with. But the reality is that you are building a big company and you need to start also put in place. You can be creative and innovative as much as you want, but make sure to measure and check what works. And if you don't know what works, you may not want to create everything as an innovation in the organization. You may want to put things that are proven to work, put them in place, and then start innovating iteratively from there forward. But the key with culture is that the culture is always based on real actions and not written rules. So if you have rules but nobody follows the rules, if you have values but nobody cares about those values and misbehaves or does something anyway differently, then those become irrelevant the same way as that ICO 9000 whatever quality system came. Then if it has no attachment to reality, if that KPIs are not, the wire is not going to the engine, then it doesn't matter and people don't believe in them and then they stop working. So don't put things in place and then behave differently. So, but if you protect the culture and everyone lives through those values, and if you need to introduce new value, they go ahead and put it in place. If you need new rules, put them in place. If some rules are stupid, take them away. But the point is that once you have them, then everyone has an expectation of what's the behavior of people, what's the behavior of culture of the company, what is the expectation of other co-workers and so forth. But if you don't have that, and if you don't, as a leader, show the way of behaving that way, then you will create a problem that it will become what it becomes, and it's much more harder to lead, it's much more harder to manage. So if you need to let people go because of that, then be quick to let them go and make it clear that it's because of this. It's not aligned with our way of working. So here's just a sample set of values, how you can communicate it. Here's like 10 points, around 10 points. It doesn't need more than that. You can have twice as many, but it's just showing that it gives clear sense of how things should be and how they are. And if someone clearly points out and highlights that this is not the way it is, then you should look at that from that perspective. It can be even less in the beginning, or it can be more later on, or you can iterate, you can change, but don't do this often. This is part of that strategy work. Maybe you look at this once a year if you need to make changes, or if something like really starts to repeat itself, then you can look at what's wrong. But this is not something that you would every week in the meeting just, hey, let's come up with new values. In the context of motivating the organization, stock options as a tool. So it's in the beginning, it's of course a tool as a sweat equity to really get people join the organization. Even when you don't have money to pay, you can't pay salaries. So maybe you can't take people full time, but you get them a ticket where the work that they're doing is going into, so they have a stake in the actual company. So whenever the company starts doing better, whenever the company value grows, whenever the processes they keep iterating, increase the company value, that's the tool. So then this is also because the company value, the exit potential of the company value, everything that is done, ultimately that value is captured into the company, and that's of course in the form of ownership from the company, where that value keeps, everyone does their share and the value keeps going into the engine. So then however that value is materialized, so either selling the company or taking it to the stock market and making the ownership liquid, or whether some future investors want to buy out some of the existing ownership from smaller shareholders. However that happens, that's then the time when part or in whole the value that they were contributing, that they can actually cope for themselves. So it's not like not getting paid, it's just paid in different format with much riskier component, of course. It also may be that it totally fails and there never is any value from that effort. But that's the entrepreneurial risk that everyone is taking at different level. Some have bigger risk from starting from nothing earlier on, and some have less risk, but at the same time they still have risk. Also, if they are like really core management people or even like extended co-founders, this is anyway a step in between, rather than opening up the original shareholder agreement that was worked with founding members at the formation phase or iterated at validation phase, that there can be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year path to get to that same level that can be built for a person to really work their way to more equal, while also earning the ownership along the way. Also, from the person who is getting stock options, it's usually a better tool, more flexible from tax and administrative point than actual shares that can have monetary value from the perspective of tax office. That if someone is just freely given 10% or 5% or 2% or 0.5% of company shares, then of course tax office would look that as an income, a taxable income, and even their shares you would have to separate from real money, separately pay from real money to those shares. And of course, these depend, the different countries have different rules and regulations in this context. So anyway, before doing any of these things, check with your local mentors, advisors, or lawyers. So a kind of a perspective to look into what type of compensation models should be used for different peoples and for different types of motivators. So whether if the talent is known and proven and reliability, then you have less risk in that context of the person. Or if it's totally unknown person, totally new person, no experience, no yet reliability factors, you have one scale on this side. Then which are the motivators? Like where are they in their own career at the moment? What are their motivators? Where do they want to go? Are they still in the learning mode? Are they already committed? What is the motivating factors? And then you can consider different types of agreements to be used. And of course, this is with or without salary, and the salary is another factor. That then, of course, if people are paid salary and options, then the options are significantly less. If they only get options, they can be more. If they get only salary, then basically that's one option. But even the salary can be tied into dependencies of actually delivering, like sales revenues in the form of commission and so forth. And then in addition, you don't have to make people employees. You can use, they can form their own private solo entrepreneurship, or even different countries have other tools that you can work through another organization, and then you just make a deal between two companies. And then you can have much more flexible rules, because sometimes the employment law creates restrictions of how different things can be used in different countries. Again, check with what are the patterns from your local support organization and their mentoring and legal advice that often is available for free. Hiring and firing people. So finding great people is a volumes game, like finding good customers. So you should always, the same way as you're always looking for new customers, you should always be finding new talent to join. If you are in the scaling phase, of course, you should not worry this too much on the validation phase. It's important in the formation phase to find other co-founders. In the validation phase, you still want to start preparing, and maybe you need additional extended team members. But when you come to scaling phase, you really have to put this in an ongoing effort to try to find good talent. Then you should also have good processes, good fixed agreements, existing agreements and models in place that you can quickly communicate, that you can explain how things work in your company when you hire, and have these different formats for depending on what type of roles are you needing, and you just keep executing this effectively. And the key part is to manage expectations the same way as you manage expectations for customers. You should manage the expectations of what the company really is about, at what development phase it is, what risks are still involved, what is the potential upside, and not try to oversell the opportunity where then the expectation, the real life would be different. So rather, again, under promise, over deliver what the experience would be for them to join the company, because you don't want to start delegating, building and training people and then just see that the people say, oh, I thought it would be something different, or I thought it would be me, but it's not really for me. And then you both have lost valuable time. So be also effective of firing or ending the agreements on failed hires fast, so that specifically if it would start to hurt the culture, it would start to not work with the organization, the other people, the chemistry between people, whatever that may be, because definitely what you don't want is that any new person who is coming in also starts to weaken the performance of the others already effectively executing in their work. So give it a good couple of months. Of course, if you like, sometimes you can immediately, the first experience you can get in the first week, that if it suddenly felt like, oh, it's not going to work, then just whenever that feeling, if that happens, execute on it and don't worry too much. There's always new people who would be more fitting, and there's always more companies that would be more fitting to those other people. So it's definitely not to worry too much. It's just finding that fit, and if the fit is not there, don't try to change the organization to find the fit. Don't try to change people too much to find the fit. If it's not there, it's not there, and just find where the fit can be found. So here's a good statement from one of the serial entrepreneurs, that the fact is that most businesses hire too fast and fire too slow. So they are too quick to hire, they try to sell, they don't do the proper communication, they don't have enough proper tools in place, they just get people in place and start working, and then suddenly agreements are unclear, the expectations were unclear because it was too fast to make decisions. But at the same time, then they're too slow to say, because they're trying to make it work, they're trying to accommodate the organization to fit better for the person, and that's not how you build the organization. You build the organization, and then there are people who like to work in that organization. That's it. You can't start changing the entire organization to fit every single person. Impossible. So just then go your separate ways and move along